Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Melissa Bridi, and I serve as the Regional Secretary for the Middle East with the World Student Christian Federation, WSCF. I'm honored to be your moderator for today's webinar, Paths to Peace, Exploring Interreligious Cooperation and Conflict Transformation. A warm welcome to each and every one of you joining us today from across the globe. It is both an honor and a joy to open this space of reflection, learning, and shared commitment. Before we begin, I would like to ask you all to join me in a moment of silence for the souls of the victims in Gaza, for those lost in the recent attack in Damascus, and for all the lives taken by war and violence across the world. Thank you all. Today's webinar marks the first milestone in WSCF's international program on Middle East peace, cooperation, and dialogue, a journey that runs from May to November and brings together a diverse community of students, activists, and senior friends and partner organizations to deepen our collective work for peace and justice. As we gather, we do so in a world scared by war, division, and despair, but also in a world yearning for dialogue, healing, and unity. This program was born from the tension, the recognition that we, as people of faith and conscience and conscious, cannot remain silent or passive in the face of injustice. This webinar sets the conceptual foundation for our journey. We will explore the principles of peace building within ecumenical and interreligious contexts, bridging global framework and regional lived realities. It is more than a conversation, it is a preparation, a call to engage with courage, humility, and hope. What we begin here today will echo into our in-person conference in Egypt later this year, where these ideas will evolve into deeper dialogue, stronger alliance, and concrete action. Thank you for being here, for showing up with your questions, your experience, and your desires to be part of a movement that believes peace is not just possible, but it's absolutely necessary. Let's bring this journey together. Before we begin with our keynote speakers, I'm pleased to give the floor to Marcelo Leites, the General Secretary of the World Student Christian Federation. Marcelo has been a guiding force in the Federation's global mission, championing youth leadership, justice, and ecumenical solidarity across regions. He will now present an overview of the WSCF International Program and how today's webinar fits into this broader journey. Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. On behalf of WSCF, I want to welcome to this space, which pretend to be an international space, an initial international space for reflection and commitment, that we call it a path to peace. It's, as Melissa mentioned, an opening space for our program, which is an international program on peace and cooperation, focused on Middle East. And we are happy that we can start this journey together. I want to frame the process and the webinar in two pillars of WSCF. One is our identity as World Student Christian Federation, which is forming young people theologically, ecumenically, and contextually, grounded in the realities and the communities. And secondly, our call to be a prophetic voice, not to be shy or not to name those things that are wrong, and to imagine something which could be better, something that is more just. Today, I want to refer that as we speak, this is not a neutral act. What we are witnessing in the Middle East currently, especially the ongoing genocide in Palestine, cannot be separated from the long and painful history of colonialism. Uh, what is happening now is not accidental. It's the product of a system built to dominate and maintained by global silence. The complicity of powerful governments and the complicity of institutions as well, including the action of those who usually speak very loud when it comes about that those countries that are not in the list of good countries. This silence has only made it worse. And I want to punctualize something that is more geopolitically contextual, which is related to this moment that changed everything in the international relationship when a few days ago, President Trump ordered a strike in Iran, bypassing everything, every institutional framework. I want to mention this because this is not only about the attack, it was also a signal of that decision of war now can be made by individuals without legal framework or any process internally or internationally. That, I think, set a precedent, and we need to take into account in this conversation as well as a geopolitical, contextual inflection point. And the precedent is basically that international law can be ignored, and for example, an entire community erased with impunity. It is in this moment that we hold the webinar, and as we said in our invitation, our note, this is not just a training; it's a space to reflect and locate ourselves in what is happening, and to begin to walk a path together. We will talk about conflict transformation, mediation, reconciliation, and interreligious cooperation along the whole process of the program. But we also want to talk about power, silence, and how we tell the truth. Because that is what we are doing here as WCF. We do not just want to run a program or activities. We want to form conscience, to prepare people to act and to speak from faith in ways that matters. I want to finalize with, in this case, from my, for most of us tradition, Christian tradition, a text in the Bible. Shout aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their revelations. Isaiah 58:1. This is not a call to be loud for the sake of it. It's a call to tell the truth when it's difficult. To stand in a public way and say, this is not right, and we believe in something better. It's also a call that the religious identities cannot be separated from ethics. And that is what we are calling to all the ecumenical institutions and ourselves in our movements now. So thank you for joining us, and I wish, we wish as WCF we can start a walk together under these two principles of WCF, forming people, but also be prophetic. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Marcelo, for this comprehensive overview. And now I have the honor of introducing our two keynote speakers, each of whom brings both lived experiences and scholarly insights to the work of interreligious peacebuilding. Our first speaker will offer a global perspective on interreligious cooperation and peacebuilding strategies. Reverend Phillip Peacock serves as Executive Secretary of Justice and witness at the World Communion of Reformed Churches and ordained minister of the Church of North India. He has previously taught social analysis and theology at Bishop's College in Kolkata. His journey in ecumenical formation began in the student Christian movement, which continues to shape his commitment to justice and dialogue. With a deep grounding in both grassroots activism and a theological reflection, he brings a vital global outlook to our conversation. And following that, we will turn to the regional dimension of our theme, focusing on the Middle East. Dr. Nayla Tabbara is the president and co-founder of the Adyan Foundation and Adyan Europe organization that promotes diversity, solidarity, and human dignity. She is a Muslim theologian with a PhD in the science of religions, earned jointly from the Sorbonne and St. Joseph University in Beirut. Dr. Nayla teaches Islamic and religious studies, and her work spans Islamic theology of diversity, feminism, and multi-faith education. She is also the co-president of Religions for Peace and serves on several leading international interfaith and religious freedom bodies. Her contribution has been recognized with multiple international awards, and her last book, L'Islam pensé par une femme, is a powerful reflection on faith and inclusion. We are truly grateful to have both of them with us today. Let's begin with Reverend Philip. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that very kind introduction, as well as to Marcelo for inviting me here to speak to you this afternoon from where I am at the moment. I want to begin by actually thanking the WSCF for the amazing work that it has been doing for such a long time across the globe in encouraging and developing young people to think critically about their world and about their faith. I myself, it was announced in the introduction, owe my own formation to the student Christian movement. And so being part of this webinar is really, for me, being at home. And so thank you very much. But the second thing that I wanted to say as an introduction was, since I began making this, preparing for this presentation, there has been a dramatic, explosion, I should say, with the US's bombing of Iran. We have found another move within the same paradigm. It's not outside of this paradigm, but another significant move that we need to take into account when we are speaking about this topic of peace. But I want to start really talking about history and talking about three significant dates. And I want to explain why these dates are significant, because although the dates will be familiar to you, at least some of them, I want to nuance a different familiarity perhaps with them. The first is, of course, 7th October 2023. Now, I know this has often been called out by dominant forces as the rationale, the reason for what's happening in Gaza at the moment. But I want to move away from such an idea, actually, to speak of 7th October as kind of apocalyptic. Now, apocalyptic in the biblical sense is not something dramatic, but rather an unveiling of what is actually going on. And so from 7th October onwards, we have really seen an unveiling of what is actually the world order at present, with all the violence that is part of it. The second event that I want to point out is many people refer to this as a world-changing event, and it's what happened on the 11th of September in 2001. And I want to specify this because the events after 11th September legitimized the absolutely illegal attack of one country of another without adequate evidence, without adequate proof, without following international law, and actually change the dynamic of international law and how these things work. To the extent that recently in India there wasn't a terrorist attack, and India immediately attacked Pakistan without finding adequate evidence whether Pakistan was behind this at all. I mean, it is a very suspicious activity that happened after that. But the third event that I want to point out actually is 9th November 1917. And I think this is significant for this entire Middle Eastern region because that was the day on which the Balfour Declaration was released. And the Balfour Declaration actually gave legitimacy and power to the colonial government, the colonial empire, to settle a home, a national home for the Jewish people. Later on, it added that this home should be in Palestine, but it was really deciding for colonized people what their future will be and what their future will look like. And I was very grateful to Marcelo when he framed this entire introduction using the language of colonialism, because what we see actually happening today is really part of the legacy of what colonialism is and how it has shaped our world unimaginably. Colonialism is not just the control over population and resources, though this is what lies at its heart, but it has also shaped our popular consciousness of how we see the world even today. Many Middle Eastern scholars, Edward Said, for example, brought to our attention this notion of Orientalism, where in dominant colonial discourse, how people from the global south are viewed is shaped by how they have studied and how they have declared what we should be like. And therefore, we find that an empire being a coming together of military, political, social, cultural, and political power, actually shapes how the world thinks about itself and how the world thinks about each other. And so we live in the world today that is actually shaped as well as continues to be shaped by this legacy of colonialism. And I would say actually this entire Middle East is suffering the continual legacies of colonialism and imperialist intervention. Not just Palestine, but Lebanon in French colonization, American intervention, Iran with the revolution in Iran and that being tried to suppress, the search for non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which has completely broken that country, the support and weaponization of certain factions within Syria has all led to this present situation that we are in today. So what we're really noticing is in the legacies of colonialism that we find the interests of empire actually being played out on the politics and bodies of people living in the global south. And so we find right across the world that the role of the United Nations, both as supplying weapons, but also using economic mechanisms to control how populations are, existing today, the kind of lives they have, what they have access to, and what they do not. Examples outside the Middle East, of course, includes, because of the legacy of sanctions, North Korea on the one hand, Cuba on the other, which actual people suffer the consequences of these actions that are made at a place, these decisions that are made at a place that is very, very far away from them. But I also want to move away from this a bit, right? It is not just US's support of a different regime, particularly in this case, Israel, because as Noam Chomsky reminds us, the US actually gives a damn about Israel. What it is interested in really is the control of resources. And of course, in this instance, the major resource that we are looking at is the question of oil. But it is also, and more so, particularly in a context in which we are living through a massive climate crisis, we find that there is also a control really over water as well as several other resources that we have. So given this context, really, what is another thing that is developing is right across the world is a new form of identity politics in which there is a search for a new enemy, particularly after the Cold War, in which communism kind of, more or less ended. And so we find that a shift from communism to Islam as being the common enemy. Within this context, we find that, theories of clash of civilizations, that Islam is fundamentally different from a Judeo-Christian world and therefore has to be somehow brought under control. The Islamophobic notions of seeing Islam as particularly being violent, these things are actually what has emerged in our present age because of these global identity politics. And in this situation, we find, particularly in the Middle East, Israel is seen as the outpost of the West, carrying on not only its soft power in the terms of calling on Christian Zionism and other mechanisms for ideological support, but also as a hard power, like we've recently seen the bombing of Iran, the bombing of Lebanon, and other such places as well. And this is not something new that has just been associated with Islamophobia in the present age, but actually Israel has also been seen in the past as the bulwark against a growing leftist movement or communism itself. Finally, the last thing that I want to bring before I actually offer a theological reflection on it is the question of interrogating terrorism. And who is really a terrorism? What kind of who is really a terrorist? What kind of language can we use about this? Of course, these words are powerful. Words give or take away power. But what we find more and more is that this language of terrorism is used against anyone who dares to resist global empire very easily, whereas the violence of global empire is never mentioned as terrorism itself. And this links us to something quite important, that within the rhetoric of empire, we find a bending of words to mean certain things in particular contexts that are quite opposite to the meanings that they may actually have. So, for example, security has come to mean fear. Peacekeeping has come to mean warmongering or control of populations. With this in mind, actually, I would like to now offer some sort of a theological reflection on this, with this actually very hasty but wide analysis of what's going on. The question, for us then, if we're going to talk about peace, is are we really flogging a dead horse? Or in the midst of all this violence, has it become all the more necessary for us to speak of peace? To nuance it, to discover for us what does it mean, to use these global terms of peace, shanti, shalom, salam. It would be appropriate, therefore, I believe, to look into our own religious traditions to discover what they have to inform us about peace. For the promise of religion in one form or the other seems to be peace. Yet, looking through peace through a religion's lens is also problematic, because religion and theology have more often than not been drawn upon to legitimize violence. Therefore, even Buddhism, a religious tradition supposedly based on non-violence, has been invoked in Japan to justify violence and killing, arguing that in the play of the universe, it is not my hand which strikes the other, but the other fell in the sweep of mine. So someone else fell on the hand that I was holding a sword. I didn't do anything really. On the other hand, Islamophobic tendencies have equated Islam with violence in spite of the fact that Islam itself means peace. To those of us who draw from this Judeo-Christian tradition, we draw on the idea of shalom, which is not just peace as defined as an inner state of mind or something which is internal to the person, but rather a peace that is defined in terms of well-being. It has to do more with the state of our bellies, whether we have food in it or not, as well as the state of our mind. And perhaps this resonates with indigenous peoples' thinking on the good life or conviviality, which ought to be available for all. Yet this idea of shalom as well can be problematic, for it is often invoked by Israeli forces in their rhetoric against the Palestinians, so much so that Palestinians hate this word. The question is, how do we nuance peace in such a way that it speaks to our times today? The first theological issue, perhaps, that raises itself is, in the course of a discussion, is a question of justice versus peace. Peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is more than that. We know situations where peace is enforced, perhaps by peacekeeping forces. But these two are related and connected questions we must ask. The first question is, whose interests does this peace serve? And secondly, and even more importantly, we must ask whether this peace is in conflict with the question of justice. While we often offer platitudes about peace with justice, the fact is justice can be and often is in conflict with peace. This conflict between justice and peace comes to the surface all the more clearly when there are questions of power involved. In such circumstances, we often find that it is the powerful that wants peace, while it is the powerless who desire justice. And let me repeat that for you. It is the powerful that wants peace, while it is the powerless who desire justice. In the specific case that we may find that both the oppressed and the oppressors want violence to end, the powerful with guns desire peace, but those who have lost loved ones, those who have been rendered homeless, desire, what do they actually desire? Will peace necessarily bring justice for them? And we find that in the Gospels, Jesus is not always presented as one who brings peace, but he's also presented as one who pits father against son and mother against daughter. At other times, he spoke of not bringing peace, but bringing a sword. Is Jesus trying to argue for the sake of justice over peace? We have to ask the question whether peace would necessarily bring justice for the victims of violence. A more difficult question, though, to answer is whether in that particular situation, whether justice would necessarily bring peace, particularly if we have retributive justice. There can be no doubt that violence is the means of imperial forces. But the question that we also have to ask is, can empire be resisted by the use of violence itself? And I would like to raise up how we think of violence itself and the use of violence in affecting social change. There have been many who call for creative use of violence in social transformation. But can we uncritically accept the use of violence even in freedom struggles and violence that is used to establish an alternative social order? Arundhati Roy, recently speaking about Hamas, said that we cannot tell the oppressed how they must resist. And there is a lot of truth to this. And perhaps we must understand the social consequences, the oppressive structures, perhaps, that lead or push people to these desperate acts, not just in order to bring down a particular oppressive regime, but also just to register a sense of self. But we must also understand that these acts of violence disrupt the lives and livelihood of common people. After all, we've all been witness to how those who take up guns to get the power often keep the guns to keep the power. Worse still, history has shown us that even those who take up arms often factionalize and turn on each other. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Jesus said, and this must mean that violence, even in its creative use, has a tendency to perpetuate a cycle of violence. From another perspective, the resort to violence as a means of social change cannot be truly participatory. This is because the guns only belong to a few, and the rest of the population are content to give over the consent to those who have the guns. The struggle then becomes a struggle of those who have the guns, and in time it increases the distance of the common people and their aspirations and hopes. Violent movements therefore become disconnected from the reality of the grassroots. In the real context of empire, though, we have the issue of the glorification of violence. Empire, by its very nature, glorifies violence. This is seen in the huge expense on defense, as well as the place of honor and prestige it gives to its military. Even today, I received from a respected theologian, I have to admit, a WhatsApp forward which called us to respect the Indian Army, to not question it, to actually stand in support of the nation. This is nothing but a glorification of empire and almost, how do I put it, an admiration for violence, so to speak. Look at, our celebrations of national days. It is nothing but a show of military strength. In fact, the strength of empire depends on its glorification of violence. Yet it is not only empire that suffers from the glorification of violence. The phenomenon is also to be found among those who resist and oppose violence. So then how do we go forward with this? What kind of resources do we have that we can resist empire and actually build a creative understanding of peace? And I'd like to make 3 points over here, really. Firstly, I want to ground my argument that all of life is sacred. Every single part of life is sacred. There is actually a Jewish midrash that is told of when the horses and the riders were thrown into the sea, in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh and his army were thrown into the Red Sea and they drowned. Then Miriam and others began to sing and dance. And the angels came down from heaven and were singing and dancing along with her. But after a while, the angels decided, let us see what God is doing. And so they danced their way up to God's room in the heavens, and they saw that God was sitting quietly in his room, in God's room. And they asked God, why are you not celebrating? And God answers them saying, how can I celebrate when my people are drowning? The point is that God is continuously on the side of the suffering, of the oppressed. And if this dynamic shifts, then God shifts sides as well. And this, I think, is important for us to consider. So these three theological points. Firstly, the way we consider peace. For peace to be a means of resistance to empire, we should, I think, give up notions that peace is either a process or a goal. Peace is not a process that works automatically independent of any agent. Neither is peace a point to which we strive. Rather, I would like to envision peace as a project. To envision peace as a project is to envision it as a task that we should be committed to. And so, peace requires the everyday work of justice and this commitment to peace. Second, point I would like to make about peace is that peace should be a life-affirming peace. This view of peace rejects the false imposed peace of peacekeeping forces, but it is rather a peace that ensures the fullness of life. And the fullness of life is not just for some, but it is for all. The fullness of life that finds its expression in living a life based on the experience of Christ who gave his life for all. In contrast to empire that has an insatiable appetite, a life-affirming peace is actually being based on solidarity with others rather than aggression towards them. Lastly, peace ought to be a counterculture to violence. That is to say, peace has to be radically opposed to the violence of empire and empire itself. It can have nothing to do with it. That peace is conceived of as wholly other to empire. It cannot use its methods, it cannot use its means, nor even share the same goals of empire. So, what resources do we have for this radical opposing counterculture of peace? And I would like to offer the imagery of the cross as an alternative. Firstly, while the cross was in the midst of the violence of Roman Empire, it stands radically opposed to it. It does not use the glorification of the violence of the Roman Empire. Jesus does not call down his angels, but rather the brokenness of the man on the cross confronts the violence of empire. Jesus does not lose to the violence of the empire, but voluntarily takes it on in order to oppose it. In the cross, the holiness of God protests against the violence of the world. And the Son gives up his life in an act of satyagraha against the violence of empire. If we are to approach the cross from an Indian perspective, perhaps one offering is a cross as satyagraha against an evil and oppressive empire, where the satyagraha of God is an act of solidarity with the victims. It is a protest of truth that does not accept the violent ways of the oppressors, yet chooses to protest in a radically different way, the way perhaps of nonviolence. Yet, the image of the cross also invokes another imagery for us, the imagery of women who stand at the foot of the cross. All the men have run away. Men are right from birth socialized into a system of violence, a system that is very much part of and also serves the interests of empire. Women, on the other hand, are more often than not the victims of violence. Women are not socialized into the ways of violence, but have been able to find other ways to cope with it, mostly by coming together in a common struggle against violence. Whether this is in the Mothers of the Disappeared in Argentina, or women's movements in Indonesia, or several other parts of the world that have been countering violence. The culture of women is a counterculture of peace. And this is perhaps what we need to do. We need to learn Shanti, Shalom, and Salam from women and their cultures of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Philip, really for this inspiring speech, for the important definitions that you gave us, for the questions you've raised. It was very inspiring. Thank you. And now we will leave the floor for Dr. Nayla. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Marcelo. Melissa remembers that when she told me that this conversation will have the title of Paths to Peace, I told her, no, this is a white concept. This is an empire concept. We need to speak about justice. And I was going to start by saying that after Gaza, I cannot hear the word peace anymore without being triggered. And I cannot hear the word hope also. When hope is something that is seen as if it's hovering above our heads, as if it's calling us to be complacent and stay where we are and be nice, be kind, and then hope in something. And then I hear Philip, and the words of Philip explain actually so much, because when he says that يعني Gaza has been an apocalypse in the sense that it has been a revelation. It has shown to us, I mean, the corruption, the level of corruption in in all the human system. It has shown to us, I mean, realities and hypocrisies, but it has shown to us also where the fight needs to be. And this will inspire how we perceive of hope. Hope would only be when we are working together. So for me, of course, there is no path to peace unless it is working for collective liberation. And as also Philip said, but in my words, I would say working for collective liberation, but not with the tools of the oppressor. So we need to find also new tools. I will, because we have 20 minutes, and because Philip actually said it all, I will speak a little bit of my own experience. So you presented me as a Muslim woman theologian who has worked on theology of diversity. I mean, we were a group of Christians and Muslims founding Adyan, which means religions, in 2006, at a time where we needed to talk about religions, especially in a post-war or conflict in Lebanon, where conflict was related to religions. And here we could talk about conflict resolution. Here we could talk about listening to the different narratives. Here we could talk about the need also to hear and learn and meet each other in Lebanon. And based on this, I ended up working also on a theology of diversity, a new Muslim articulation of understanding diversity from the Quranic text or in the light of the Quranic message, rereading, reinterpreting the Quranic message to include everyone, to include diversity, to allow everyone to enter paradise and not to exclude people from salvation. And in the meantime, also in Adian, we've been working on what we call religious social responsibility, in the sense that instead of dialoguing as learning about the differences in our religions and learning about the commonalities, working together for the common good, working together for development, working together for awareness in our country. And this is something that continues and goes on. But after Gaza, things have to go much, much deeper. It's as if we were on a certain surface trying to bridge between people working. And I'm not saying that before Gaza, oppression was not there. There are oppressive systems everywhere. And within our own Lebanese culture and structure, we're xenophobes, we're racists, we have so many things to work on. But maybe Gaza made us more aware of everything that we need to be working on, and that we cannot be one bit complacent, that we need to be working uh, for for liberation, that we need to be working for collective liberation, for against all forms of oppression, and there is no more time, or there is no more possibility to say to spare our energies. We need to give it all. I also wrote during the war on us in Lebanon that in times like this, we need really messianic roles. And by that, I mean that we cannot do small acts of kindness anymore. In front of all the injustice that is happening, in front of all the evil that is happening and the silence facing it, we need to do big acts. So all of us are actually called to do very big acts. Sadly enough, a lot of times in our religious circles, we talk about love, about mercy, about peace, about perseverance, but we don't talk enough about courage. And the current situation calls for real deep courage, and that courage to face things the way they are. In Islam, we have a hadith, a prophetic saying that says that one of the most important forms of jihad is saying truth in front of despotism, or in front of empire, as we would say it today. We need to be saying those truths. We need to find ways also of resistance, but not with the tools of the oppressor. And we need to be creative here. Philip spoke of nonviolence. I think more and more what we've been reflecting on is also this wake-up call also that happened with Gaza, is we need to decolonize our minds. We need to decolonize our sciences. We need to decolonize our theologies. And we need to work for liberation theologies. And because also we have, there is a school for liberation theology from within Islam. When we decolonize our minds, we realize that for the longest time, we were told that we were less important than the colonizer. We always wanted to look like the European. We always thought that, okay, they are right. They are speaking about human rights. They are the ones who are developing the sciences. And now it is up to us to reclaim our stories, to reclaim our narratives, to reclaim our sciences. We need also to decolonize theology, or de-imperialize our theologies. We talk about empire, but also as a Muslim, I can say that also we lived under Muslim empire for some time. So Islam was also empire, and I need to decolonize this from within. So so this is a big work, I mean, that we need to do. What also was very important for me, specifically after Gaza, was also seeing that it was people from the South. It was the indigenous people who actually had our back, who were in solidarity with us. So when our heads were always turning towards the North, always thinking that the West had the answers, in fact, when we were drowning and screaming, and we still are, it's the South that has our backs. It is people, it's indigenous peoples from all parts of the world who said, we stand with Palestine, we stand with indigenous people. And this tells you something. This tells you that these are a lot of people who have lived, who have suffered empire in their own skin, who have been, whose lands have been taken and who have been given reservations, whose cultures have been practically erased, and who until today continue fighting every day to keep their cultures, their languages alive, and who have been genocided against. So and still remain standing. So this is what have this is, I mean, this change of perception, this decolonization that we need to do in our own minds. Me personally, I can say that like years ago, I actually, because I had my PhD in France, I wrote in France because I'm from a country that was under French mandate. I somehow, at some point, thought that I was practically French. And I would write also in newspapers in France. But I realized after Gaza that as long as I was the nice little Muslim who speaks the language that is accepted, that is assimilated in France, I'm tolerated. But the moment I started speaking out, I was no longer tolerated. I was no longer given the floor in newspapers and on channels as I was given before. So it is this awakening that makes us realize that we need to reclaim our voices, our stories, and and work together. Now, there is something else that Philip mentioned, though, is that the problem is that it is not like we're decolonizing, so the West is bad and we are good. The problem is that there is corruption everywhere and that there is hypocrisy everywhere. Philip mentioned those who have weapons will end up using the weapons on the inside. So in the end, it is not like we are countering a group of people and turning to another group. No. When I'm talking about West, I'm not talking about all the people who are standing for rights. I'm talking about colonizing powers and powers today who are continuing the Orientalist colonizing capitalist movement. And this also exists within our own societies. So we have corruption, we have despotism within our own societies, even resistance movements. Many of you here are from different parts of the world where you have resistance movements, and you know that even resistance movements can become tyrannical on the inside. So for me, what is the most important and is that this is our role. We're talking here as theologians, as persons of faith. What is most important is that we do not go for counter testimony, that we carry really the testimony of the values and the principles we believe in, and that those principles and values, we live them on all the levels. When we are talking about equality, when we are talking about human dignity, when we are talking about justice, taking that, living that, when we are talking about liberation, working for liberation on all of those levels, internally, externally, locally, and globally. When talking about liberation, but also talking about freedoms. One, I think we have people from Egypt here with us. One important song for Gaza from an Egyptian group called Kairoki also calls out Western interest given to freedoms, but not to liberation movements. And again, when I'm talking about Western here, I'm talking about empire. But at the same time, when we talk about liberation, it shouldn't be also at the expense of freedoms. I mean, we need to have both. We need to be able to fight for both, because we've seen also movements that talked about liberation but at the expense of individual conscience and individual freedoms. So we need to carry those together. One point also in also calling out or in decolonizing ways of thinking for Muslims is also, of course, working against all the tropes of Islamophobia, but also being aware that Philip mentioned Judeo-Christian culture, but this is very new. Even Judeo-Christian, the concept of Judeo-Christian culture is very new. It is connected to, in a certain way, to Islamophobia. It is connected to one group of people against another group. So we need to really also disentangle also some forms of expression that actually can have a big meaning on our perceptions. I think I've spoken a little bit on many levels, but I think also something in what Philip was saying reminded me also of a verse in the Quran that says that your creation and your resurrection is like that of one single soul. Your creation and your resurrection is like that of a single soul. So this is to tell us that we are all connected, that we are all one soul. And that is why we cannot have peace unless there is collective liberation for everyone. Unless, there are no more marginalized people, unless that there are no more invisible people everywhere. So it's not only about wars, it's about really putting everything we have to work together to uncover all forms of oppression and to liberate all peoples together. So this is no longer the time, I would say, for dialogue, and this is really time for action together. And if we are still thinking of, oh, we need to go and meet the other that is different, we need to hurry up and meet and change our perspectives, because there is a lot to do. There is a lot to do here. We are at an end of a cycle for humanity. And for me personally, the way I'm living this is the way I can sustain this and live this is I am only holding on to the best that humanity has offered in terms of struggle, but in terms of also the highest principles, and taking them forward and let them take me forward with them. And because there is no more time in wasting with, small steps. We need very big steps now. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nayla, for reminding us that silence should not be an option. And thank you for the wake-up call that you gave us and the call for action. Now we will open the door for questions. So if anyone would like to ask, now it's the time for reflections or questions, and your insights will enrich our webinar. So please don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. You can, on the chat box, you can write that you want us to open the mic for you. So you will ask your question, or you can just write your questions on the chat box and I will read them. I'm sure, like, after all, we need some few minutes just to reflect all what have been said, because it was like very deep and very touching. So we need to reflect on it. Even if your questions are in Arabic, I can read them, don't worry. Just
Melissa,
yes.
I would like also to add one thing. I mean, our colleagues also and friends from Palestine, working on liberation theology from Palestine, are also working a lot, and here Christians, are also working a lot to, expose Christian Zionism, also latent Christian Zionism. And I think this is something also as a call to action for WSCF, because without noticing, accepting that God is how do you call it? Real estate agent is accepting that, and having a problem with Israel, not with the concept of it, but with the fact that it's not ethical, is actually a hidden form of Christian Zionism.
Thank you for highlighting this, and for sure WSCF will be working on this issue, and we will collaborate a lot in the future. Now I'm starting to get some questions. Oops. Fadi Nasser started with the first question, which, sorry. Okay, the Lebanese experience, how will it come in perspective? So I think this is for Dr. Nayla. Please, when you ask the question, also like tell me who do you want the answer from. So this is the first question from Fadi Nasser. Dr. Nayla?
Yes, do you want me to try to answer, or should we take several questions?
You want? Okay, yalla. How to break the cycle of violence if sometimes fighting is required to claim the peace? How to stop How to stop persecution without counterattacks? How to get out from the imperialism system? The other one is for Philip. In the Indian context, why does the present internal regime in India support surrogate colonialism in Palestine? questions. Our speakers talk about more of liberation to really achieve peace. What can you say about using armed struggles as a method of achieving peace based on justice? Kyla, reference for Christian Zionism is well, it's Nayla, reference for Christian Zionism is well commended, and sure we need to work on this. Thanks for you. If every religion upholds the value of peace, why do we, as a global society, continue to struggle in collectively embracing the path of peace for the greater good and humanity? Is peace only a word for dialogue and talks?
Shall we take this,
Yes,
dear?
yes. Can we start now?
I can start also with Fadi's
Yes.
question and others. Thank you, Fadi, and hi, Fadi. Of course, I mean, the Lebanese context, I will not talk about it because you know as well as I do that it is like I will not talk about it in extensively, but I will say I will say one thing in response to somebody else who asked here. You know, what type of response can we have if it's not armed response? Actually, from the Lebanese experience, and we've seen that armed response is not the even the resistance in Lebanon with that was thought to be like very strong and all of that is nothing compared to all the arms, all the weapons, all the help that Israel has been getting, all the AI used, all the technology. So I mean, even if philosophically we were with armed resistance, practically, logistically, armed resistance today is leading, is leading nowhere. So, but more in accordance with my beliefs, I would say that the first thing for us to do is to be conscious. Is to be conscious for the need to resist, is to be conscious of all the for the need for liberation, and then afterwards to think of ways, like for example the boycott, divest and sanction. Like, think of ways that are creative ways. But that do not use the tools of the oppressors. So this is that. In Lebanon, Fadi, I would go also to say that it is also sad that from all the series of, I think, imperialism that we've lived in our country, we have been pitted against each other. And because many times we were not able to fight against the colonizer or the main tyrant, we ended up fighting against each other, and this is continuing, and this is where we need to also be conscious and to stop. And I mean, we still have until now such opposing positions, even concerning Gaza in Lebanon itself. And this is very sad because when you are seeing that much number of people who are mutilated, killed, starved daily, genocided, I mean, we lose our humanity if we don't see in them people. And sadly enough, some people in Lebanon are still with the divisiveness that happened during the civil war in Lebanon, where Palestinians had a role, and where there were massacres from both sides. So Christian villages were massacred by Palestinian fighters. And until now, because of no work on healing memory, no work on bridging people together has happened, you still have some people who cannot forgive, and therefore who cannot also have solidarity with Palestine. So also this is something that we need to work on. This is a deep wound in our humanity when we lose our capacity to empathize, and when our capacity to empathize is only connected to our religious or ethnic or other stances. And I gave just one example now. It was about, I mean, Christians with, but you have so many other examples. I mean, Muslims unable to empathize with Armenians and so on. I will stop now.
Thank you. Philip, there are a couple of questions for you. If you want, to answer them in one quick reflection, it would be good.
Okay,
Rather
I'm
than
going to try.
yes.
Okay, I'm going to try. And so I'm going to, these are very, very good questions, but I'm going to go with the one that I consider to be easiest first, and then work my way up from there. So Priscilla asks, in the Indian context, why does the present internal regime in India support surrogate colonialism in Palestine? And I'll give you 3 reasons, and this is very easy. Number 1 is Islamophobia. I think it has become very easy for India, the general population, but particularly the regime that is in power, to see Israel as a bulwark against Islamic terrorism in that region, and then extrapolates this in the Indian context. So I think this is really at the basis of what this is, because what we have seen is, when I was growing up in India, India described itself as the best friend of Palestine. We saw this as an independent struggle and were totally committed to the freedom of Palestine as a nation. So there has been a dramatic shift. The second point in this line, I think, is the economic power of Israel. And economic relations that India wants to make with Israel. I think this is something we have to contend with. And the third, of course, is I would actually say Christian Zionism, that has provided the software that is necessary for this ideological support that is within the context. Having said this, I would actually like to point out the connections between India and Israel. And many people have said that what India is doing in Kashmir is an experimental ground for what Israel wants to do in Palestine. And I think we need to flesh out these connections as well. Perhaps the more difficult questions that are being asked over here that is a question of violence in resistance. And this is not an easy question to answer, really. I wish I had an easy way to offer an answer. So I'm going to say a few things. I don't know if these are answers, but I will just say a few things. The first thing I want to point out is that the violence of the oppressor should not be equated with the violence of the oppressed. These are on 2 completely different levels. And I think we must understand this difference over here. The second thing that I want to stress is that violence as a way of escalating in ways that we cannot control. I pointed it out in my presentation that I made, and I think we must be cognizant of this. The third thing, this was in a way perhaps a question that was posited to Jesus as well. And he offers some sort of an answer in Matthew 21, where he talks about the parable of the vineyard. Now, in Christian traditions, it's become common to see the vineyard owner as God, and the people who are working actually on the vineyard as people who needed to be corrected. But perhaps let's take this parable as it stands, right? There's a vineyard, there is an absentee landlord who's controlling the vineyard, and there are people who are actually working on the land, and the absentee landlord sends people to take away the produce that they have been making. And you see in that parable in Matthew 21 that there's an escalating sense of violence. First, they hit the people who come, then they hit them on the head, an escalation of violence, and then they kill the son who comes. The person who will inherit all of this. And the question Jesus ends at, what do you think that the vineyard owner will do? And we know that the vineyard owner will come back with even greater violence. He will come with a great amount of violence to smash this peasant resistance that is building up over there. And I think that we must recognize that when violence happens from the side of the oppressed, it is met often with terrible violence. I mean, we've seen this in Gaza now, right? I mean, this genocide that is happening over there. So I think we must be cognizant of that and who suffers the violence of this. The third thing that I want to talk about is actually, can we reconfigure violence in a different way? To talk about that when we resist and we want to use, and there is perhaps a necessity to use violence, do we necessarily have to use violence against people, or is there a space really for violence against things? Now, within capitalism, unfortunately, property and people are equated one to the other. And so violence against things is seen as a terrible, terrible thing, right? Property has been destroyed. But I think property is not life, right? It's not living. So there is a case actually from a communist struggle in the Telangana region in India, where there was a Coca-Cola factory. And the resistance went, and there were security guards in the night, took the security guards out, tied them up, and then burnt the whole factory down. Not a single loss of life, but a factory that they believed was, a symbol of the oppressive system that they were fighting against, was completely destroyed. And I think perhaps they did make their points through this. But this is not an easy question, because I want to say this: I believe all life is sacred, every single life. And within this, I mean, taking away anyone's life, I think is unjustified and uncalled for. So we must find other ways, but I know this is not easy in the context of when people are being brutalized and massacred. I mean, how do you actually register some kind of resistance? And the third question that I want to add to is when every Priyaranjan, when every religion holds up the value of peace, why do we continue to struggle? I want to say two things about it. Firstly, is I mean, perhaps we, SCM, right, Student Christian Movement, and WSCF, both Christian, perhaps we need to recognize that religion doesn't have the large place in life as we think it does, right? Let us be a bit. What's the word for it? I've lost the word now. Let's be a bit honest with ourselves. That religion doesn't play this large role that we assume it to play, and just changing our religious and theological perspective is not necessarily going to change anything. I mean, that is one. But also, I think at the end, I mean, the fact that we have many religions, and I think we need to contend with this. Religions are also, by definition, exclusionary spaces. If I'm a Christian, it means I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Hindu. And, that is a boundary that I'm creating around myself, which I think is a difficult proposition in itself. Of course, this is where I think it's important for us to speak about the fact that we have multiple identities. Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm also an Indian. I'm a Dalit. I like Manchester City football team. Don't hate me for this, but I have several identities. And I think we need to talk about that. So this is what I want to say. And then there was a question that I only read by Vinod. So let me get to that. How can we participate in solidarity? I mean, this is also a really good question, because this is a practice. And whenever we are speaking about practice and praxis, I think there is no axiomatic way of going. There's no one size fits all. We have to look at the context and then make, strategic decisions of how we go further. But let me push this a bit. Perhaps we need to move away from this notion of solidarity with the oppressed to allowing ourselves to be led by the oppressed. So we don't join in their struggles and express, oh, I'm solid, but no, let their visions, their aspirations actually lead us. And then maybe we have a different way of looking at things. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Dr. Phillip, and thank you, Dr. Nayla. We still are getting a lot of reflections and questions, but I think that we've already talked about. So thank you, everyone, for all your engagement. Now, I think Marcelo had a question. Do you still want to ask it, Marcelo, or it's already covered? Marcelo?
Yes, one moment. No, it was more a reflection. Just first of all, thanks both of you for your presentations are very prophetic. And just to remark that we have discovered along this last 20 years working in programs with the Middle East that the problem is justice or lack of justice and colonialism. And I think that most of the organizations that are like-minded, and I really appreciate the role of the world community of churches or Reformed churches, who has always been a witness, a prophetic witness. And Adian organization as well, which is a Muslim organization, if I understand. So we have that diagnosis. Okay, it's what, brother, but we have the diagnosis and we share that diagnosis. And sometimes I wonder, and this is an open question to reflect, how we can, let's say, in the oppressor language, just for a moment, standardize the actions in a way that together we can, create a synergy together, right? And that is not an easy question, because in each webinar, I guess everyone ask or mention the same, but still it's important to see how we can create that kind of language campaigning, prophetic actions to act together and be stronger. So the diagnosis is there, and we know that change may happen or should happen. It's an open reflection, and to see how we can create this space for synergies and working together.
Thank you, Marcelo. Now to finalize, we have Serena Tiburtini, which she is the Regional Secretary of Europe, and she is the Peace Building Coordinator of WSCF. So the floor is yours, Serena.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much to Philip and Nayla, who spoke before me. You were very prophetic and very inspiring, especially because you highlighted some of the things that I think as a federation we need to prioritize right now, which is listening to each other and being bold. The motto of WSCF Europe, each region of WSCF has a motto. And the motto of WSCF Europe is living faith together for justice. And I think it is a call to live out our faith, not in isolation, but in community, not in comfort, but in commitment to justice, as speakers before me have highlighted, but also to dialogue and to peace, grounded and rooted in our faith. Because I agree that, as it was said, religion can be a secluded space for some and can be exclusionary. But what we need is not walls, but bridges, as you have said. And now I'm in a very uncomfortable position as the person from Europe talking about peace building after hearing about how much the colonization and destruction of empire is needed. But I think I also would like to share some little bits of my personal experience to show you that we also need to decolonize Europe. I have an interfaith family. My husband is Muslim, and when I introduced my husband to some part of my very Christian family, they were extremely surprised and they were very worried for my faith. Because they were worried that I had no community to practice my faith with. Because we grow up in a way where we have to stand by our identity because we need to define ourselves by what we are not. But sometimes we can define ourselves also by what and who we are and what our values are. For me, it was very easy to find community and to be even more motivated to work on my faith with someone who has a completely different practice and a completely different faith. Because actually we are supporting each other every day in trying to look for justice and to fight for justice and what is right. So I think we have to challenge ourselves in understanding where we come from, because sometimes we think that interfaith dialogue and cooperation are a concept. But at its heart, it's about real people. It's very simple. It's real people having conversation about what is important to them and what is trust and what is understanding and how we can work together. Initially, when Melissa asked me if I wanted to say something today, she told me, like, maybe you can talk about why cooperation. And I said, yes, that I can do, because I know and I can see it, like, in my daily life, that if we lower our prejudice, if we lower our barriers, and if we actually go into that dialogue, then the cooperation makes our values and our struggles and our courage bigger. Because sometimes in our experiences, religions can divide and have divided and have caused pains and have caused rifts. But when people come together to actually listen to each other and to connect, something really transformative can happen. And I think if we start with each other, reducing the tension with each other when we go into the encounter of others, it's then when the magic happens and we can build friendships and we can prevent conflicts. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the work of WSCF, it is because this is what we are trying to do with young people, to try and provide them opportunities to do just that. And to talk to each other and to challenge each other, and also the things that are being told to them. Because one of the words that keeps resonating with me since the beginning of this webinar is critical thinking. You have repeatedly before me, Philip and Nayla, you have said we need to decolonize, we need to deconstruct, we need to challenge the things that we know about ourselves, about our communities. And I think through that, and through also disagreeing, we can actually find a way to be prophetic, as Marcelo was saying, and find our mission. So I think what I believe opportunities like this are providing young people is not just a discussion, but like discovering who we are and what our values are, but also that there is a community out there, that we are not isolated. I've read in the comments that it's very common for some denominations to support Zionism, for example, or to support Islamophobia. And sometimes people who disagree can feel very isolated. But there is a community of people who are trying to dismantle that, who are trying to create spaces where we can be bold and we can do actions together and actually transform the current situation and create something new. And I think for me, today was really that, was finding a community and seeing that, oh, wow, I'm not alone in my thoughts. Actually, there are louder voices than mine, but together we can be even louder. So really, thank you very much, because I think this kind of passion, this kind of not just believing in what we have said and we have shared, but also wanting to have an action plan, deciding what do we want to do, what we can do, how do we keep talking about this. This is what will probably, with time, maybe not tomorrow, but what will actually make the change. And I don't think I need to take any more of the time that we have, because I think if other people have questions, we can also take more questions. And I just wanted to say that generations can learn from each other many things. And if young people have examples of older generations or their peers learning to talk to each other, trying to together find solutions and being louder, then this is what will be passed down to the next generations. And we have the privilege to have many young people in our student Christian movements who are ready to take action. So I think we owe to them a lot, and we can bet on the fact that they will change this world. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena, for sharing with us your personal story and your experience. And thank you speakers and Marcelo and everyone and audience for being here. It was really inspiring, and I promise that this is not the end. It's only a beginning, and we will continue this mission and raise the voices louder, especially in our meeting in Egypt that will take place in October. And there we can collaborate and put an action plan that will last, and you will teach us and we will learn from each other's experience to be louder. Now it's the end. Time flies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And I promise we will have more and more from this.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.